Why did the Pheu Thai party win so much and the Democrats lose so much?
I think it's attributable to two things: the plus for Pheu Thai and the minus for Democrat. So if you look at the what we call the campaigning strategy, I think Pheu Thai has managed one of the most effective campaigning strategy. This is one thing. Secondly, Pheu Thai has worked for so long in order to keep what we call the fixed vote among the grassroots and or even some of the group of people in Bangkok. That is the second element. And the third one, I think that Kun Yingluck proved to be what we call advantage by inducing what we call the so-called thinking vote. She became at first like underdog. Underdog with what we call likable character could prove to be a very good strategy in order to induce those who are surprised by her likable character and the way she answers everything. She is not alienated anything. So that is another score that Pheu Thai could build up based on the personality of Kun Yingluck. And fourth, I think that is because Pracha Thipat, face, for example, some of the new party which otherwise would go to Pracha Thipat, like Lak Santi, Kun Chu Wit, and most important is the phenomenon of what we call the so-called no vote, because I think that no vote would affect Pracha Thipat more than Pheu Thai. But on the other hand, the minus for Democrat has the problem alienate most of the group. So if you look at the media, are not as friendly as the Pheu Thai. Secondly, Democrat, ran on what we call a misled what we call the campaigning. Democrat came to realize just 1 week before the problem of Democrat is not attacking or fighting on the policy basis of Kun Yingluck, but have to fight against Kun Thaksin. So that is the campaigning technique, I think, that has been delayed or misled. And lastly, I think that Democrat, has no what we call a team that working so closely like what happened in Pheu Thai's case. So this is the minus for Democrat that lead to the what we call the defeat of Democrat and the landslide victory for Pheu Thai.
What are the top priorities that the new government should work on right away?
Okay, there are two what we call agenda. In fact, if I look from my point of view, what we call the hidden agenda, that is the political agenda, is more important. But in presenting to the public, I think the most important would be economic and the social. So in terms of what we call economic and social, the social is more important, but it's taking time. How to narrow, for example, the income disparity, that is very important, and also it's time consuming. Second, that is the economic agenda. Kun Yingluck has two conflicting objectives to achieve. On one hand, Pheu Thai announced that they are going to have what we call the minimum wage of 300 baht. And for the graduate, undergraduate, once you finish your undergraduate, you get 15,000 baht. But on the other hand, there will be reduction from the tax from 30 to 20 or something. How could these two conflicting objectives reconcile? So you have already said, but that is the platform. So how to deliver, how to reconcile these two conflicting? Because if you look at the Thai economy is still vulnerable to what we call the exchange rate. This means that our competitiveness is still based on what we call the raw material and labor cost. By injecting, for example, the cost of labor to 300 baht, in that case, how could our product be competitive given the so-called ASEAN after how to compete with a lower cost country like Vietnam and all the other? So how could our product could be, for example, competing with Vietnam and all this country? So Pheu Thai have to work hard in order to deliver the promise. By doing so, that could be what we call a corollary consequence of trying to, for example, enhance, pushing up the cost of living. How could you, for example, answer one thing, the fiscal stability? Because by injecting more cost, and at the same time, how could you get revenue? Given our present state of fiscal situation, we are left with just about 16 or 17% for what we call investment budget. In the future, how could we get more and more income given all this platform? So this is what we call tasks that need to be implemented and need to reconcile. That could be a very difficult task for Kun Jinglak. So these are the economic agenda that Kun Jinglak have to do. And for the short term, of course, try to push up, for example, economy, because the world economy is not yet strong enough. So for the short term, need a certain injection in order to make sure that our growth momentum will remain intact.
Can we expect to see excessive spending by this government?
I expect that there will be a lot of spending. There are two things. Either lie to the people by not doing so. I don't think that Pheu Thai will do that. So in order to keep the promise, I think that there will be a lot of spending. So it depends on what we call the international situation. If in the international situation is not, for example, is not inducive for doing that, given, for example, the next couple of months, the world economy is weakening, in that case, it will be quite difficult for the government to maintain that kind of spending. Looking what happened, like Greek and all the other. Of course, our fiscal situation still remain quite healthy. Look at the deficit is just about 3 or 4% comparing with GDP, and the debt is still hovering around 40 or something like that. But of course, if the economy is weakening, we are depending 70 to 80% on the import. With the import declining, that could, for example, affect, for example, our fiscal policy. So that is depend on how the world economy fare in the second half of this year.
In terms of foreign affairs, would this government have credibility in the eyes of other countries or foreigners? Because everyone knows that this government is the proxy of Kun Thaksin, who is in Dubai.
Well, good. There are two things. By getting what we call transparent and election, the legitimacy is already there. So there's no problem because the eyes of foreigners want to see whether you are elected on the basis of what we call just and transparent election. So this already the answer. But secondly, in order to maintain the legitimacy, the beginning of the legitimacy beginning with the election, but how you fare in the ongoing. So it depends on how the government, for example, treat, for example, the minority, and how the government, for example, fare in the county, and particularly the maintaining, the upholding of the rule of law. So this is very important in order to make sure that the new government could be legitimate all along in the process. Because democracy is not just the beginning. Democracy is a process. Beginning is election, and ongoing, and the end. So the government has already achieved at the beginning, but it depends on how government address the problem, particularly the sensitive issue, the amnesty, that could explain the future performance of the government.
Is amnesty for Kun Thaksin the most sensitive issue for this government going forward?
Exactly. If you look at one thing, the divisiveness of Thai economy, of the Thai politics, is based on, on one thing, one group of people want to uphold the rule of law,
right.
Based on what they have seen, what the Kun Thaksin case. So these people are now becoming what we call the minority. And of course, if you look at the majority that elect Pheu Thai, not all of them support, for example, the breach of rule of law. They support Pheu Thai on the basis of the platform. So if you count on these two, if you try to breach the rule of law by, for example, the amnesty for the sake of one person, or even hidden by the sake of all the person, but deep down, that is one person that is at stake. So in that case, I would think that could create what we call the eruption of the new divisiveness. So it's how sensitive the issue is. The government has to smoothen out, for example, the situation, not lead to what we call the so-called vicious cycle. So that is very important, and the most important for the government to tackle, that is the political agenda.
But can we expect to see relations between Thailand and Cambodia improve because of Kun Thaksin's personal ties with Hun Sen?
Frankly speaking, I look at the Cambodian problem. There are dual issue. One is, frankly speaking, is international, because claiming ownership is already irreconcilable. But secondly, I see the Cambodian problem also what we call, is not just purely international, but purely domestic. So with Kun Thaksin, for example, with Kun Yingluck, this second element could be smoothened out. So I expect that there could be a certain improvement between Thailand and Cambodia with the new government, because this is, as I say, but the problem of what we call the international issue remain. But of course, we can remain without claiming the ownership, but yet we can cooperate. So in this sense, I think that the situation in Cambodia will be improving.
Now, Pheu Thai has won the majority of the votes, and with the coalition partners, it may be having around 300 seats in parliament. Would it have a stable government then?
Well, the stability of the government is not depending on what we call the so-called number. Look at what happened Kun Thaksin. Kun Thaksin in the second election has already won the landslide.
Right.
So it depends on how the government behave, how the government, for example, tackle the problem. So it depends on 2 or 3 things. If the government, for example, breach the rule of law, that could lead to problem. Secondly, the government rule in what we call a transparency and with no conflict of interest. That is the second element. All these 2 are what we call political. And then how the government deliver the social and the economic agenda. Could a government, for example, narrow, for example, the income gap? And lastly, Thailand has been lacking far behind our neighboring. Look at the growth rate during the last 10 years. Average half what we have achieved during the previous decade. And comparing with our ASEAN neighbor, we are still lag behind. So the task of the government here is try to move Thailand forward in terms of enhancing the competitiveness. So it depends on how the government tackle all this problem.
A lot of people ask me this question. Maybe you can help me answer this question. Some people don't understand how come red shirt leaders one day become MPs and probably ministers as well. How can that be possible? Well,
you have to accept what we call the surprise acceptable, what you could expect, because we are living in what we call the so-called the world is flat. Everything could happen at any time.
Especially in Thailand, right?
Especially in Thailand. So as long as the lecturer, becoming prime minister on the basis of legitimacy, there's no problem. But the only thing that we have to see is that once you are the minister, would you behave, for example, legitimately? That is what we matter for us.
Will there be reconciliation in Thailand?
Reconciliation is depend on how you consider the root cause. For example, the reconciliation sometimes is impossible if the root cause could explain what we call the zero-sum game. So in this sense, it depends on, for example, how you smoothen out the zero-sum game case. Zero-sum game case, on one hand, the divisiveness in the past is depend on, I want to uphold the rule of law. The other one want to circumvent the rule of law. Because if you can, for example, smoothen out all these 2 elements altogether, make it legitimate and acceptable, that could be possible. Otherwise, I don't expect that the divisiveness could be reconciled, because the problem by itself in the past is irreconcilable. But the new government has what we call the historic opportunity in order to transcend that thing. Try to get well the reconciliation, not at the expense of breaching of the rule of law. That is most very important. If the government can transcend that kind of thing, Thailand can move forward in a foreseeable future with a more promising stability.
Is this the biggest challenge that Kun Yingluck will face?
Exactly.
Thank you very much, Ajahn.
Okay.